Hi, and welcome to the Holding Cell, doing time for Poetry Day Ireland 2020. My name is Brian Kirk, and I'm going to be reading some poems today, and hopefully you'll stick with me and enjoy it. There's been poetry all day at the Holding Cell from 10 o'clock this morning, and it'll run until the last reader, Anne Walsh Donnelly, at 10 p.m. tonight. So I'm going to start with my first poem. It's called Multiverse, and the theme for Poetry Day Ireland this year was There Will Be Time. I wrote this poem at the end of last year, beginning of this year, and just coincidentally it deals with issues around time. And there's an epigraph to it by Hippocrates. And in Greek, there was two words for time. There was kairos and there was chronos. And chronos is what we think of as normal chronological time as it passes. And kairos, I suppose, is best explained as opportunity. So the poem is multiverse. Every kairos is a chronos, but not every chronos is a kairos. Hippocrates. Once upon a time, in a land not very far away, I was a version of myself before I met a prototype of you. Two opposites collided in imagined space, auguring a future harmony, unexpected but awaited. We sensed an opportunity, a spontaneous knitting of perspectives, gauche, sophisticated, beyond the accidents of birth. We shared a sense of quest, fated in a sacred logos, set forth upon an epic journey that took us back to here, where we are now. The sense of so much living crammed into moments that collapse, unfold in arcane sequences, altered as occasion might demand. Dates like fairy lights strung across a darkening garden when the party's almost over, and the next day hovers in the branches, dim outline of morning, promising fatigue and argument, desire asleep in bed beside you, long after the alarm's been silenced, by a hand much like the one that knocks, demands you meet the future, a concept that will be elusive and concrete, indefinite, but growing sharper every day. It's time to rise and rush into that future, past the present, outrunning time's arrow, outpacing yourself in the narrow stream of things that constitute a life. Keep going. You must be ready always for the moment when the stars align, before the arrow falls, or after memory unspools, a remnant on the floor. Light dies, and when a different light emerges, more blinding than before, you believe in magic once again. A child cries, an old man dries his eyes. Um, the next few poems I'm going to read are poems that were written out of the current lockdown pandemic situation that we're in, which is hugely unusual for everybody and unique in our lifetimes, I think. And so the first one is, I suppose, it's a poem that kind of dwells on the anxiety that goes along with it and tries to see a way out. It's a short little poem, and it's called, again in the time theme, it's called Present Tense. The time is now. In order to stay sane, we're told to live in the moment as if that's a good thing. The past is another country, its borders closed to those who choose to embrace the still instant before it turns over and settles back into itself. The future is nothing but a trick of the imagination that you will never see. Consider the bird, the tree, the flowers on your walk. They die each time you turn away and rise again the moment you return. Now is the time to live. Relax. Take each day as a gift, a present from a sleeping world that never dreams. The next poem I'm going to read, again, very recently written as well, and very with much gratitude, published on the Pandemic website, which is a great website that was set up just very recently by Joy Redmond, Liz Quirk, Niall McCardle, and Ruth McKee. And it's logging people's thoughts, poems, feelings, memories, impressions of living in lockdown and living with the current crisis. And they're doing a great job. I published this poem with them just last week, I think it was the week before, and it's called Staying Home. And it's a villanelle, which is built around repetition, and there's a constraint in the way the poem is written, which kind of, I think, reflects the constraint that we're all kind of living with at the minute. It's a bit lighter as well in tone, maybe. Staying home. Church is vacant, the public house is closed, families forced to make some conversation. Monday morning, not a sinner on the road to work or school. Empty buses brake, unload dead air that might be carrying contagion. Church is vacant, the public house is closed. You hide in plain sight in your own abode. Remove your homely self to your workstation. It's Monday morning, not a sinner on the road. And that report you promised Friday won't upload. You calculate percent of population. Church is vacant. The public house is closed. The things you knew for certain now unknown. Faith to doubt to ennui. Concatenation. Monday again. Not a sinner on the road. Why would it be? The speed of life has slowed to a limp, dying generation. Church is vacant. The public house is closed. Monday morning. Not a sinner on the road. The next poem, again, written very recently, and I'm delighted to say published today by Boyne Berries in their special issue 28 COVID issue, which is available free online as a PDF. And my thanks to RFA, the editor there, for accepting it. It's a poem I wrote, I suppose it is written out of the current lockdown and situation that we're in, and with thoughts of isolation. When I was a young man, I went to live in London on my own when I was just turned 21, and it kind of, this isolation and people being isolated made me think of that, where I voluntarily went away from everyone I knew and from my family. So I lived there for 6 years all in all. I had many good friends, but when I went there first, it was very difficult, like, because I didn't know anybody. But after a while, a good friend of mine came over and lived with me for a while, Jerry, and I wrote a poem for him in my first book, and hopefully in my next book, this poem will form part of it as well. So it's about Jerry. Jerry took his own life some years later, and it's something that you never really come to terms with. It's just very hard. So I wrote this poem, There Will Be Time, in memory of Jerry Flanagan. I was angry with you. I was hurt the way you left with no goodbye. For years I've been waiting for a note of explanation to turn up. Winters, summers came and went, the usual blather about dying and rebirth. How could I know the happiness I'd see, the hours of thoughtless play, the journeys I would make, the joyful homecomings? Long days spent on my own, content or agitated, the meals I shared with loved ones, the crops I harvested, the fruit I left to rot. All these years I was angry with you, but anger, like life, is short-lived. Eternity is long. Love lasts beyond ourselves. And of course, on a sad note also, this week we lost Evan Boland, who is a great poet and former editor of Poetry Ireland Review, but a poet who's done so much for poetry in Ireland, for male and female poets alike, in widening what poetry can be about, the field of what poetry can do, and opening poetry up to so many people. I'd like to read one of her poems just as a tribute to her, and it will hopefully lead into, in some way, into a couple of poems that I'll read of my own later. I was very affected by this poem when I was putting together my first collection. It's called That the Science of Cartography is Limited. And I loved the title, and I loved the poem from the moment I first read it. And I was very taken with maps myself in some of the poems I was writing at the time, and what maps can do and how we use maps. And even as a kid, I loved books with maps in front of them where you could look at the geography. But I suppose in this book, or in this poem, Van Bolen somehow encompasses the personal, political, the historical context. And she does show, that the science of cartography is limited, and it's maybe that the poem that can show the things that the map can't show, and that's the way it emerges for me. So as a tribute to Van, I'm going to read That the Science of Cartography is Limited. that the science of cartography is limited, and not simply by the fact that this shading of forest cannot show the fragrance of balsam, the gloom of cypresses is what I wish to prove. When you and I were first in love, we drove to the borders of Connacht and entered a wood there. Look down, you said. This was once a famine road. I looked down at ivy and the scutch grass rough cast stone had disappeared into, as you told me, in the second winter of their ordeal in 1847, when the crop had failed twice. Relief committees gave the starving Irish such roads to build. Where they died, the road ended, and ends still. And when I take down the map of this island, it is never so I can say, here is the masterful, the apt rendering of the spherical as flat, nor an ingenious design which persuades a curve into a plane, but to tell myself again that the line which says woodland and cries hunger and gives out among sweet pine and cypress and finds no horizon will not be there. And so that's a tribute to Van Voland. Where they died, there the road ended. There's a poem that links, I think, to some degree with that. That was in my first collection, and it's simply called a map. And it's my attempt, I suppose, to create, as oftentimes as I do, to hold on to memory in some way. And the imagined map is the way I thought it could be done. A map. All he has is a map in his head of a few crooked fields, scarred by train tracks, hemmed in by salt water and a burgeoning town. Sometimes he goes back there to pick at the past, to leave the imprint of his shoe in old mud, the sea wind on his face with his back to the town. He walks the few miles in his dreams till he comes to the house, back to front now since the road moved, concealing its sacred junk. He opens the back door, never the front, and steps into the past, affected by pity and love for those who lived there with him once, now all gone. The map is a child's drawing, scrawled crayon on raw nerves, etched in gilt, carefully rolled by an adult, a scroll from a story where X denotes buried treasure. The next poem that I'm going to read, again, it has to do with trying to find a place and memory again. So it's looking in a similar way at something from the past and how it can be held on to. And I suppose the poems in these cases, as I said before, the poems are the map that can take you back or can create that connection, hopefully, among people. This poem is called Orienteering. Even if you found your way back home, what difference would it make? There's no one there. The people and the place that held you close, embraced or restrained, you never were sure which. The words they said have all dissolved in time. All that remains is a Sunday coat and matching scarf, a battered hat, and a penknife that peeled apples in one go, cleaned fingernails, and tamped tobacco down in a pipe bowl. If you sketched a map from memory, you'd maybe see the broad outline of staggering events, or feel the smart of tiny hurts, absurdly magnified as you move away. The world gets smaller as you grow. The day turns faster as you age. It makes you think the present is recoiling from the past and the history you carry in your heart. My next poem is actually going to be my final poem. And before I go, I just want to say thanks very much to Roz and Simon Lewis for organising the holding cell. And there's been a whole series of meetings since this whole lockdown, a whole series of readings since this whole lockdown began, of extraordinary quality. And it's been really enjoyable. And I'm sure it's a great resource and release for people who are living in isolation or who are living in with the restrictions we have at the minute. And so great thanks to them. And I hope everyone is having a great poetry day and will continue to tune in. Next up after me at 6 p.m. is Mary O'Donnell. With Mary will be certainly worth listening to and watching. And there's Grace Wells later on as well. And as I said, the last reader is unwatched only at 10 p.m. tonight. So there's a reader on the air every year as we go. The final poem I'm going to read today, again, is in the thematic idea of maps and what they can be. And it's slightly different. Again, it's a structured poem and it's built around repetition, as the earlier poem was, the Villanelle. It's a sestina, which uses repetition to build up an accumulation of images. And I suppose the map in this poem and this poem itself is more like a fable than a memory. So it's a kind of it's a work of imagination, and that's the way I always think of this particular poem. But it tells a story of itself as well, and it tells a story, I suppose, again of the, um, the inability of maps maybe to keep everything or to keep hold or keep track of everything. This poem is called "The Man, the Boy, and the Map," and thanks once again for listening today. The Man, the Boy, and the Map. The man decided he would draw a map so that his son would never become lost. He wanted so much for his little boy and worried he would sometimes lack the fortitude to keep hold of his hand. He felt his days go past him like the wind. All year their house was blasted by the wind, an island place not shown on any map. That's why the father drew his own by hand. The record of their lives would not be lost. The boy would sometimes think of things he lacked, but judged himself a fairly happy boy, although he would have liked a friend, a boy, another name to shout into the wind, to help him take his mind off what he lacked. He liked to think his life a kind of map of secret ways and private paths long lost to others, unguided by a hand as warm and work-worn as his father's hand, who, after his wife's death, had raised the boy alone, who struggled with his loss, awake all night and listening to the wind, poring over bill or book or map, thinking of his son and what they lacked. Sometimes they managed to forget their lack when they walked the island hand in hand, over rugged hillsides with the map the man had drawn to help him guide the boy. The words they shared were scattered by the wind, and meaning and intention were all lost. And though the two were safe and never lost, they could not speak the truth of what they lacked, but felt it in the ever-cutting wind and in the press of hand on tender hand. The father sensed an absence in the boy. The son clung tightly to the folded map. The man and boy walked onward hand in hand, not lost, but never naming what they lacked, until a hungry wind devoured the map. Thanks very much, everyone, for listening. That's my reading for Poetry Day Ireland, and thanks again to the Holding Cell for hosting this. And I hope to speak to you all and see you all soon. Mind yourselves and take care.